Hello, my name is Agne Narushite and I shall be moderating our third session on contemporary books. We shall discuss how they transcend the boundaries of traditional book design. Our first presenter is Dr. Karolina Jakaitė from Vilnius Academy of Arts. She will present her research on Antanas Kazakauskas, a master of collage who designed books in 1960s and 70s. Dr. Karolina Jakaitė is a design historian and researcher at the Vilnius Academy of Arts Institute of Art Research and a co-founder of the NGO Design Foundation. Her research includes design history studies, design and identity, national pavilions, and Lithuanian design in the 1950s and 70s. Her latest publication is a book about the Soviet-Lithuanian pavilion in London, Cold War Capsule, Lithuanian Design in London in 1968, published by Lapas in 2019. The floor is yours.
Hello everybody, I'm glad to be part of this online conference, and my presentation will be dedicated to the very interesting and creative Lithuanian book artist and designer who passed away last year. His name is Antanas Kazakauskas. I first heard about him 12 years ago. This was related to my PhD studies at that time, and the topic was Lithuanian graphic design of the 60s and 70s. And actually this long-lasting research resulted as a book during my postdoc studies just recently. Last year I have published a book called Cold War Capsule, and Kazakauskas is one of the heroes of this book. So he designed the catalog for the Expert Pavilion in London in 1968. When I first saw this small 14 to 14 centimeters book of 60 pages, I was amazed how modern and contemporary typography language looked like. But there was no name written because that was an expert project, and Kazakauskas was not mentioned that time. Of course, it was possible to attribute this interesting book to him because of the special style which was visible in this catalog. And actually this book became my table book for many years, more than 10 years, and actually at the same time it was like the crossword puzzle. I was trying to discover his style, his typography, the quotes he used. It could be called the masterpiece of Kazakauskas style. I don't want to analyze this small catalog during this conference, but I will come back to this catalog because it is one of the most brightest examples of his style. For me, as a researcher of design history, specializing particularly in the Soviet period, 60s and 70s, his name became very important, but there were no or very less information about him. No visual material, just few photos. This one you see from the book which was published in 1964 called Book and Artist, edited by Antanas Gedminas, and a few posters designed by him in the 60s. So the one which was very memorable was called Do Not Damage the Landscape, and I am showing it right now. It's again actual in the nowadays, and by showing this poster I would like also to introduce some keywords which are from today language, like the one which we hear every day during the quarantine period, sociable distance, which is actually more physical distance, but in the case of Kazakauskas, sociable distance is very the right one. Why? I will explain later. He himself has chosen the path to be sociable distance from that Soviet period. So at one point I can say that he has chosen to be somehow forgotten. That's why there were not enough information about him. So I was very happy when one day I had a chance to meet him. Actually, I got his contacts, I called him, we talked and agreed to meet. So this is the photo of our first meeting in 2013. I'm very glad I had this opportunity, and he was a bit timid person, not only keeping that social distance, but he let me to make this photo of him. During that meeting, I had a unique experience to discover the book clubs or garments, which is possible only at home or studio or professional involved in book design. The book covers, front and back covers, also the dust jackets, like gloves, were placed and stored in the cupboard drawers. One more important detail that I would like to mention, that in many cases they had the signature and the stamps of permission of artistic borders, responsible persons on the other side. Of course, this is very valuable for the researcher like me. And this special experience suggested this comparison with clothes or garments of books, which I have chosen for this presentation. As we all know, it is quite often used in the sphere of book art and design. One of the quotes I would like to use is by Adrian Frutiger, who said that type is the clothing a word wears, so it must be subordinate to the content. Actually, this particular quote is very suitable for Kazakauskas' work and his style. This comparison was possible through material touch of these book gloves. As we know, it is very important, this tactile emotional moment, the same as with the fabric, textile objects and fashion design. Not only to see, but also to touch and to feel this material. And of course to wear, to use in case of books while looking and reading. I had this unique chance again at the beginning of this year when we were preparing the small exposition dedicated to Kazakauskas' book design. That was during the Vilnius book fair in February. While showing this photo, I also want to say that there was an intention to repeat this, or even the more extended, the special edition of the curated book exhibition during this conference. But as we all know, the plans were stopped by the virus. There is always the bright side of things, as we know. So all these books and the gloves stored in a box, lent by the family of the artist, stayed safely at my home during this quarantine period. So this pile of books, it is just approximately half of the books Kazakauskas designed in the 60s and 70s. But I was very lucky to have them at home. Very shortly introducing him and his biography facts. So this is the photo from 1956, the year he entered the studies at Vilnius Academy of Arts, the former Art Institute. In front of the main entrance to the academy, we see the artist surrounded by his professors, painter Leonas Katinas and sculptor Žuklys, among his colleagues and friends. Actually, the main entrance is the same nowadays too, only the landscape a bit different. A few photos from his student days. One is on the roof of Vilnius Cathedral with the castle in the background. Returning to the modern and contemporary terms, I could say that Kazakauskas could be considered the first certified graphic designer of that time, because he was the first ever student to obtain a diploma in industrial or advertising graphics. Between 60s and 76, 15 applied graphic artists graduated from the Department of Graphic Art, and the first of them was Kazakauskas, as he himself remembered that moment as not very important. It happened just by accident, as he said. The advertising graphics was proposed by his professors. Supervisor was Vytautas Jurkūnas, and there, unfortunately, there are no visual material left of his diploma project. But just to imagine his style of this period, I have chosen two posters by him. The one is advertising the art lottery, and the next is inviting to visit Vilnius. We will come back to this poster in my last slide. Already as a student, the artist began collaborating with the publishers, mainly two publishing houses, Vaga, the translation in English could be the furrow or a channel, and Mintis, the translation in English could be fort. In the 60s and 70s, he was actively involved in the book art. While preparing this presentation, which is by chance appeared in this English section, I was thinking of this photo from 1966 as very suitable for this situation. I will try to explain why. As we have an international online conference, I don't know where exactly this photo was taken, in his own studio or editorial house, but he has chosen the very international background for this photo. As you see, we see the advertising of Vin de Rocher, the French wines, and the poster from International Book Art Exhibition in Leipzig in 1965. Again, a bit updated with collage details by Kazakauskas, so the very international atmosphere. And the only word we can see in Lithuanian is the very key word for this conference. It is in Lithuanian skaitykite, or in English it's read. The photo, as I said, from 1966. Books and literature editing process was familiar to him, but as we know, it was very highly controlled sphere. So now with this slide I want to introduce another very familiar keyword and the phrase of nowadays situation, like isolation, or to isolate himself, ourselves, etc., etc. So his main job, actually, he has chosen as an isolation from that Soviet reality. The editorial office of the magazine Mūsų gamta, or in English it's Our Nature. So he worked at this editorial office for almost 30 years. And this is also the explanation why like some of his books, around 20% of the books he designed, were related with nature themes, hunting, and as we see again, the international atmosphere is visible. We see the French poster Amber de Lituanie near his table, Amber of Lithuania. Kazakauskas was very passionate, even he has chosen that some kind of isolation, but he was very passionate while creating his books. He closely communicated with the authors, and then was very, very sensitive to the books he designed. So actually, I was very lucky when I found this inscription by a Lithuanian writer, the very early inscription, I would say, from the 1962, saying a lot of thanks to the designer. In Lithuanian, he has chosen, the writer, such a very special word, lakus, but in English it should sound like the volatile, variable, and very alive cloth of the book. So he was thankful and again used this comparison with the fashion design, with the clothes and the books. As I have chosen this language of fashion design and continuing these references, I would like to show the tools he worked with. So again, we see a bit similar with the everyday life of fashion designer. So the scissors, blades, knives, rulers were his main tools. So these are the authentic ones he used in his creative process, again from his apartment and his family collection. Now, as the time is going on, so I would like to go to some of the examples of his books. He could be called master of collage. He worked in a very constructive manner with the care to every small detail. Just to insert one of the quotes by Jan Tschichold, he once said that to what should one pay a particular attention in designing the book? As a unified whole, to simple little things. So we see a lot of simple things which were important during the construction of his books. And the next slide is the same book jackets or the dust jackets. And we could say that they were again the minimal distillation of the spirit of the book content, with the very precisely and very playfully chosen collage details. His attention to the end leaves, constructing the artistic unity, paying attention to those little things, as I said, and to that playful, constructive manner. The figure of the gentleman, as we see here, the next book designed by Kazakauskas in 1969, and as we see how creatively he has chosen and inserted the logos, his signature, and the small details of the book. Again, a very good example of his Kazakauskas style and artistic unity, the use of the dust jacket and the special attention to every detail, especially the end leaves in this case. His famous asymmetric composition and the lowercase typography. So this is again the continuation of the same book. In the next slide, I would like to pay attention to the distinctive use of photography in his books. So in his covers, especially that diagonally cut angle of the photo, like his signature. Again, these cut of images come from the different reality other than Soviet one. We could recognize Jean-Paul Belmondo, also the faces of other famous actors and actresses. I don't want to mistaken by guessing who is who, but actually they are very familiar to the Kazakauskas style. He was the one who was called to actually to design the series of the books, very popular ones, called I Want to Know. And actually that is again the very familiar Kazakauskas style, where he found the inspiration. So actually the biggest window to the world, it was Polish literature, art, films. He had a possibility to visit Krakow Poster Biennales, also the exhibition in Warsaw. And apart from Polish samples, Kazakauskas bookshelves contained many Czech magazines, Swiss graphist annuals, etc. and etc. That was very influential for him as an artist of those days. Summarizing what I wanted to say, what this photo montage and those insertions meant, I would like to just say that this process of cutting something and then pasting or inserting into different contexts meant that you wanted or you have chosen some kind of isolation, some kind of escape, try to live like other life or somewhere in the different reality. So coming to the last slides, I want to try to summarize, even it's not easy in this short presentation, but actually as we see again that similarity with the nowadays, that we can't travel at the moment. So we know that he created in the Soviet reality when they also had the limited travel possibilities. So he traveled in his own world. So from one book, from one graphic artist, from one poster to another. And of course, it's a big detective way to discover where those details come from. And in the last slide, I also wanted to say that, of course, while looking at those I'm coming back to this slide. Looking back and those jazzy compositions, international photos, it could be said that, of course, he tried to live in another way, in another life, in that difficult reality. But artist himself once said that anyway, they were all soaked in that Soviet mania. This was very rude saying, but that was a very open-minded saying of his position. So he wanted himself to keep that social distance from that reality. So in the very last slide, actually I want to say many thanks to his family, to also to a lot of colleagues of mine who supported my research during many years. And I would like to conclude with two posters from the 60s. The one which is by Kęstutis Gvalda, who says, "Beware of the flu." And the last one actually is trying to welcome to Vilnius when it would be possible to travel again. Thanks a lot.
Our next presenter is Charlotte Biszewski from the Eugeniusz Geppert Academy of Art and Design in Wrocław, Poland. She will discuss post-digital bookmaking on display. Charlotte Biszewski is a PhD student at the Eugeniusz Geppert Academy of Art and Design in Wrocław. Her research involves narrative and interdisciplinary printmaking. She works as a community artist, printmaker, and creative technologist with a collaborative approach to print. After graduating in 2015 with a MA in multidisciplinary printmaking at the University of the West of England, she spent 2 years researching the Bristol print industry, which she presented through talks, various publications, and the documentary film Bristol Set in Print, a finalist at the Social Machinery Film Festival. Other awards include the Rebecca Smith Award for Fine Art Printmaking, the David Cantor Memorial Award for Printmaking, and the Visegrad Scholarship from the Open Society Archives. The floor is yours.
Hi, this is strange. I'm sure all the presenters can also share with me. Talking to a computer screen right now is a bit awkward to do my presentation, but I will do my best. Firstly, thank you for having me at this conference on the material body of the book. It's an honor to be here. I'm really happy, and I'm really excited to see the presentations that come about. So my talk is called Accounts of Post-Digital Bookmaking on Display. And this looks at, well, firstly, to define post-digital as the period we are in now, where the digital is no longer used for, digital is no longer like a revolutionary phenomenon, but it's become a normal part of everyday life, integrated to how we function. And it has dramatically changed how we absorb books, how we read digital books, and how book production and book printing has completely been revolutionized. And also, with these new digital technologies, we've also found that there's a new sort of networked connection that exists between book fanatics, printers, independent publishers, audiences, and bookbinders, and everything like that has now become far more networked and connected. So this research, this paper, seeks to examine a couple of institutes which are, well, museums, but also involved in contemporary forms of bookmaking and printing and publishing. I'm going to particularly look at Typer, where I am now, and which was previously known as the Estonian Print and Paper Museum in Tartu, Estonia, and the Book Art Museum in Łódź. And I'll be discussing how they are able to sort of maintain their integrity, maintain the heritage of print and its practice and processes, while embracing innovative approaches and while exploring innovative areas of print. And firstly, I guess a little bit about me and my background. My name is Charlotte Brzewski. I'm doing a PhD at the Akademii Sztuki Pięknej w Wrocławiu in Poland. And I have a background, my research is in digital and experimental print, but I have a background and an interest in letterpress and historical forms of printmaking and print history. So in 2016, I led a 2-year interdisciplinary research project looking at the history of print in Bristol, and particularly in letterpress print and bookmaking and publishing across the city. So I connected with people who worked in the industry. I spoke to the people who were the compositors, paper hands, proofreaders, printers, worked in the bindery, and I asked them for their stories and experiences. From this I made a documentary film, which you can still find online if you Google Bristol Set and Print. And and then I also got them to teach people, younger people my age who had some experience with letterpress but hadn't done the same 7-year apprenticeship. And I got them to teach us how to print, and together we printed a collaborative map of Bristol. And I learned from this basically one of the powers that print and the processes behind print and bookmaking has is this ability to work in collaboration. And print, it kind of creates a unique sort of community among like everyone from different ages and different places and different backgrounds, all were able to share this one project and work towards one thing. What I also learned was that I hate carrying cases of lead type around. Like print is, the materiality behind print is, I don't know, it makes a funny contrast to how we live today. So obviously, industrially, print and letterpress, it has no relevance in the same way that it used to. So we have to kind of find, I guess, ways to embrace this and change it. I also found as well that, like, always with print, it was like the work just takes. I learned how much longer it takes. So I was always arriving 2 hours earlier and working well into the night to work with the other participants. But yeah, after that I was a resident at the Estonian Print and Paper Museum in Tartu, and this is where I now work, and this is the kind of background to the story. So this is not a map of the current situation going on, but this is a map of the Association of European Printing Museums, the AEPM, and this is a map of different independent printers or museums or institutions across Europe. Some of them define themselves as perhaps working museums, others are cultural centres, others are private printers. But one thing that's been really strong is this platform with the internet has been able to develop, and people have been able to exchange skills and knowledge and keep themselves going. So that's something that we're particularly interested in, is connecting these skills and knowledge across a wider platform. So what we do here at Typer and other institutions are doing as well is they have a collection of equipment, history, archives, tools, machinery from print, and it's finding a way to keep these preserved, but also keep them in use. Like, many times you'll hear a printer say that in order to keep these machines in order, they have to be working, they have to be used, everything, and also for the audience to experience print, it's important for them to have this, they have to be able to see how it worked, and they get a stronger knowledge of the history and the implications of print and what the work was like and what went into a book. So that's something that we try to do at Typer. Now, in the International Council of Museums guidelines, the ICOM guidelines, it only briefly refers to this idea of the working museum. So it's something that we've had to define in our practice and define over the years. What is a working museum? How does this work? How can we promote, also alongside this, a more collaborative approach? Like, we have all of this equipment behind us, and how can we put it into use and connect people to it? So for that we have an education program, and also, I guess, the name Typer now, the reason the name was changed was to reflect sort of the wider activities we do. So we are not only this museum where we do tours, we show people around, we show people the equipment, we tell people the history, but also we have a working paper museum, paper kitchen, where we make paper and do different types of paper folding, paper structures, and paper art. We have a full working bindery where we produce notebooks that we sell all over the world, and also we have a artist in residence program and a kind of printmaking studio and gallery space as well. So with all these things we try to do to not just use the space, but find new ways of working. And one of the things that here has been really effective is this European network of volunteers. So the European Solidarity Corps, or Erasmus, and you have volunteers coming from all over, from different parts of the world, and they stay for maybe a year or 6 months, or we have short-term volunteers, and they learn skills in print and how to make books. And the thing behind this is that they always bring something more to the table. So something that they see that we can't see ourselves, a new way of working, a new perspective on the equipment that we have, and new processes. So in fact, even though they're learning while they're here, they teach us, and that also kind of keeps the energy going and also makes us drives us to find new ways of working. So I mentioned some of the artists that we have, and I thought I would go into this a bit more with detail. So one of the artists, the Tattoo Artist in Residence program has run for about 7 years, and mostly here in Typo, in the museum. And we've had artists coming from different backgrounds, not just printmakers, not just graphic designers, but musicians, performance artists, everyone. And this was one from Pete Vance from the UK, who was inspired by the collection of type to create his own alphabet, which he then printed onto wound. He had tape wound with onto frames. So then you can see here, he printed the tape on this like a net frame, and he unwound it and rewound it around these boards. And now these became dictated musical notes. So from this, he was able to make a he was able to use wrong video. He was able to make his own musical piece. So it's something that was really fascinating, which we can't see in ourselves in typo, because we don't have this background. We don't know this. We can't view our own collection in this way. So it's really interesting to have these artists come from different parts and be able to tell us more about our collection. So another example of that is one there was Daniel Schneider and Bonnie Lucas, who came from Richmond last year, and they were particularly interested in some examples of what they called two-foots, and we have in our collection in our wooden type. So a two-foot is where you'll have I don't know if you can see this, a wooden letter carved on one side, and then on the other you have another one. So here I think what's happened is you've had a W which has been cut in half and now has become an N or H when they've run out of type. So they found many examples of these throughout our collection of type, and they worked out like where they've been used and kind of looked at the implications behind this, what these mean, and this was again something that we hadn't seen in our own collection, we didn't know about. So these small bits of history that they then documented in an artist's book is something that we're not fully aware of in our own collection. So now I wanted to move on to the second part of my talk, which was about another institution which works in a similar way as us, which is the Book Art Museum in Poland, in Łódź. And it's run by Janusz and Jadwiga Trzyżno, and here they are dedicated both to artist books and contemporary Polish artist books and their own production of book arts, and also to preserving the working print and print machines and casting machines. So here we can see a monotype caster working. They have 5 of these, as you can see in the video, and these are used to cast the lead type, which is then used for printing. So traditionally, the way that these function is you would have a keyboard which punches holes into a tape. The tape is then fed into this casting machine, which dictates which order and which letters should be printed by the punch holes in the tape, like old-fashioned punch cards. And one of the exciting projects that they have been working on here, which was a collaboration between Krzysztof Swychan and John Vilnius. It's a project where they built a Raspberry Pi converter, which is a small microcomputer converter for monotype casters. So it bypasses this need for a tape, and you can directly program the monotype caster to work, and you can directly type in which letters to be cast. This has been completely shared on GitHub, which is an online site for sharing computer programs and codes and things like this. So, or just small projects, making projects. And this is something that I think that the print community could really learn from the maker community. This idea of really sharing stuff and making stuff open source and completely accessible and adaptable for everyone online. And so next I'd like to also talk about this other project, which is another casting project that they were doing, which is the Brigada project, which was led by Boris Kosminka and a team who all worked on the Brigada typeface. So they found the old matrices, and they were found in the Book Art Museum, and then they recast these using really old casting techniques, and they digitized this and presented it online. So now these are also able to download and open source under open font license. So I think there's huge potential for, a huge responsibility for these institutions in not only just keeping the heritage alive, but also pushing forward and promoting new ways of working by involving the artistic community, so we can rethink how we have our collections, and practitioners and bookmakers who can all put these equipment to use, drives innovative practices forward. And currently, we are at a really interesting time where we are trying to rethink how we work. Let's just put it like this. I'm sure everyone is of the same moment. And that's something that we're trying to do by reaching out to other institutions and other artists and other working museums to see how they are working, how they can teach us, how we can share this knowledge, and share this across, not just across Europe, but internationally. So this presentation is on a research project in its current and beginning stage of realization, and it's kind of like a call to arms for people who want to join with us and explore how we can take this forward, how our work as a museum can change. We're looking for artists, for educators, for printers, for bookmakers, people who are involved in print and print history, for researchers and academics, to see where we can take this for the next stage, in the next forwards, and rethink our processes at the moment in this current epidemic. Okay, so thank you very much. I look forward to meeting you all in the discussion.
Let me welcome Professor Sabine Golde from Burg-Giebichenstein University of Art and Design. She will discuss artists' books and processes. Sabine Golde has been working as an artist for more than 25 years. Her artist's books, published under the name of Karivari, can be seen in numerous museums, libraries, and private collections, as well as at exhibitions and book fairs in Germany and abroad. She has been a professor of book arts and the head of the department at Burg-Giebichenstein University of Art and Design since 2007. Professor, the floor is yours.
Hello to Vilnius and Hello to all colleagues all over the world who works with books. My name is Sabine Golde and I'm a book artist and teacher for book art, and we will start with a short view back to my roots. I started in 1988 on this school, Hochschule für Grafik und Buchkunst in Leipzig, my hometown. And this was 1 year before the wall falls down, and so we started really analog. We learned all techniques in the field of graphic, like silkscreen, lithography, woodcut, etching, and we worked in a huge typesetting workshop and learned bookbinding. Yes, after 5 years I made my diploma in book art and book design, and I made a book together with my friend Christiane Baumgartner, and we made one book. It's a unique because it's really huge. One of these big pages is nearly 1 meter, and you have to go around to read the story and to see all pages. It's a story by Kurt Schwitters about a man who lost his eyes. Yes, after diploma we founded the press Charivari because we wanted to go to the Leipzig Book Fair. Yes, this was the start of the press. Then we made 20 books together, and then Christiane Baumgartner decided to make only graphics, and so I'm alone in the press, and I made every year 3 or 5 books. All books are handmade. Like here the book Menetekel. Menetekel comes from Babylon. It means bad prophecy, and it's a story was written in the Bible about King Belshazzar. He was a bad king, and the prophecy was he will die. And after some days he died, and this was the end of Babylon. And I combined this old text. It's set in Hebrew and German. And on the other part, it's a poem by Hans Magnus Enzensberger with the title Blind Type, Blindenschrift. And I made the whole poem in Braille type. And so the blind people who come to the fairs can read this poem. On transparency paper are the maps. One is from Jerusalem and one from Babylon. And in the middle is a map that everybody can see where the story was situated. Athena. The title on the front page is in Greek language, only 3 capitals, and the content is stamped in the neck. The story by the goddess Athena. She came to the city and offered to the people an olive tree, and the people liked this very much and they yes, it's a good idea. We want that you are the goddess of our city, and we want to call the city after you. And that's why the city, the capital of Greece, is Athena. And I collected olive leaves at Acropolis and stitched them. At first I pressed them, and then I stitched every leaf on the paper, and between is stamped the sentence: Die Welt ist eine Welt. The world is one world. And I think now in this Corona time, it's a really true sentence. Another poem by Hans Magnus Enzensberger, one of our famous writers, poet. Fragments of the poem are stamped on a very soft fleece, and the whole poem is printed on transparency paper. So if you turn the pages, all the types overlapped, and the book is very soft. The whole book's weight is 124 gram, and my intention was that the feeling of the book is like a cloud, and the book is contained in a box with photographs, original photographs, and a cover also from fleece. Excourse, a fragment from theater piece from Heiner Müller. The text and his way to make theater is very raw and crude, we say. I don't know the word in English. And I wanted to have a book which is made with materials they are not usually in books. So I used for the stamped type packaging paper, and for the graphics, they are mono to piece, I used baking paper. And if you turn the pages, it made a very interesting sound. This is what I don't like on lectures on TV. You cannot hear the sound, you cannot smell. Yeah. Another topic which I'm interested in are bees. I made a research about bees in Würzburg. There is a university especially for biological processes, and they have a small camera. With this camera you can look inside the bee combs, and in this camera I watched many times how the bee live, what they do during the winter. And this photo, what you see in the middle of the book, is in February, where the bees are very near together to heat with their wings. They very fast fluttern with their wings, and so you cannot see the bees, but they are in the middle of the book. The photographs are printed on white paper, cut it in the form of a comb, and then I waxed the pages with beeswax. That's why you can see on the circle the text comes a little bit through. And the other kind of paper comes from mulberry tree. And this handmade paper is pressed in a form like the bees do the combs. And this was a really interesting project for me to learn a lot about these wonderful animals. All books are small editions. This edition is only 23. Also a small edition because there was a lot to cut. Empty Mind by John Cage. John Cage wrote 110 sentences and I used 5 of them and cut it on one big page, 17 for 1 meter, and folded the pages so you can see the main words very plastisch, haptical, and the text, the sentence is sticked with white letters. Yes, making books is very analog work, and since 2009 I work as a teacher for book art at Burg Giebichenstein Academy in Halle, and here you can see from the tower, Burg means castle, and I made a photo from the top of the castle, and around our rose garden are some houses, and on the left you can see the corn house, the house for the wheat. The book art is situated in some graphic classes in this house on the left. Yes, this is our place where we work, and 12 eyes are looking to you and invite you to come to Burg Giebichenstein someday. Like Simona, a student from your university, came last semester from graphic class to book art and made some beautiful books. Hello to Simona. Yes, inside the house is over 500 years old, and inside you can see the old stuff, old working machines, and every student has their own table. That's why we can take every year only 5 students to come and study. 5 years, 5 students, 25 places. Yeah, now I will show you some books from students, books with special materials which you can see not in a bookshop but at the book fairs and sometimes in libraries if they buy some books like Orwo. You can see this book in Hamburg at the art museum. The text is made on a type machine on a small, very strong paper which we use for bookbinding, an old paper. And Marianne made questions and made these questions like an egg, because one important question was, what was at first? The egg or the animal? The students learn also to work in all graphical techniques, like here Florian's book in woodcut. And the text is typesetting on transparency paper across the book, the original graphic. Another workshop is for making paper, and these 16 rolls, big rolls, the height is 1 meter, handmade paper with text is stamped and integrated in the wet pulp when she made the paper by her own. Hewon Yang came from Korea and made during her studies some very interesting books with special bindings which we all never seen before. She created her own ways of bindings for the text. Mila Voshny made a book about an corpus. She used leather for the neck, the backside from the leather. You can see the structure of the leather, and inside she made drawings from internal organs, and the form of the pages are like the organs, and printed the text, her own reflections about her drawings and the human body. Ping Pong. The basic was a poem by Eugen Gomringer. He was the first creator for concrete poetry in Germany, Switzerland, and the student Martha used this poem and made a book after the poem. The red cover is made from a plastic rubber material which you use to play ping pong, table tennis. And if you open the right cover, the ping pong ball comes out. But don't worry, it's on Angelsehne, it's on a fishing line. Yes. Europe is a community of destiny, a book by Dorothea Fleming. Her topic is to find a form for borders, to show inside and outside. Books are rooms, books are containers for contents, and she wrote a text by her own about Europe and the borders because her husband comes from Turkey and she is traveling a lot between the countries, between Orient and Occident. Our student from Japan, Yashi Ota, came for 3 years, learned German and made some very beautiful books. This is a series of fruits. The red is about tomato, the green about kiwi, and the yellow about lemon. and he cutted every foot in slides, made photos, and the text you have never seen the text on the board is going around. He worked very exactly. We all were surprised about his work. Now he is back in Tokyo and made his own book art studio. Yes, a book without paper. The whole book is made from plastic foils for garbage, mostly they will use, and the text about Romeo and William was written from Silas in memory of Shakespeare. It was the year when Shakespeare has his anniversary. The cover box is also from plastic. Romeo and William is written on it, and it's the cover from a garbage holder. One of the last books is also from plastic, Panta Agape, letters, cutted letters in a foil, and they are swimming in a foil. It must be horrible for librarians because the water is fixed, laminated in plastic foil, and I don't know how the librarians can save this book, that the water didn't come out. But Lucien, the student, sold some books. We should ask at the library what's happened with this book. But I think it's an interesting idea. One student from Czech Republic, Katja, made a book from textile and board. The green board pieces are the text part, and the textile part is the cover, or don't know how to say it. The binding is like a magic wallet, or perhaps you know Jacob's ladder. It's a special system for folding. It's not a normal accordion folding. And Katja used this cotton for colors and for the illustrations for her trickster characters. Trickster are figures, characters from mythology, and the text is about this mythology. Yes, every second year we go to the biggest book fair from the world. It's in San Francisco, the Codex Book Fair. And for all, it's a very interesting place to see what bookmakers do all over the world. And if you have time, I invite you next year in the beginning of February. We will go again, and I hope we will see there. Many thanks.
Now I would like to invite Viola Hildebrand-Schatt from Goethe University in Frankfurt am Main. She will discuss spatiotemporal concepts in the use of books. Viola Hildebrand-Schatt is a lecturer at Goethe University in Frankfurt am Main and a freelance curator. Her teaching and research focuses on contemporary art. She established and currently heads the research network Das Buch als erweiterter Kommunikations- und Gestaltungsraum, which is translated as the book as expanded space for arts and communication. Her publications on intermediality include numerous articles as well as 3 monographs on artist books, including one on Marcel Bruthers, published in 2012. The floor is yours.
So I'd like to speak about the spatiotemporal concepts in the use of book, and I'll start immediately with my presentation. Considering the dematerialization by the use of electronic device, the notion of the book as a spatiotemporal medium is less surprising than ever. Not only the codex, but alike other books based on concepts such as the scroll or the concertina are perceived to the full extent of their materiality, and this includes special arrangements as well as temporal sequences. Space and time are not only depicted in the book, but moreover influence the reception of the material body of the book. The preoccupation with the book is linked to experiences of simultaneity and succession. As such, the reception of the book can be compared with a walk through an exhibition or the assistance to a spectacle. And taking in account the sequential arrangement given by the page, the book also can be compared with a film. Also, spatiotemporal models are primarily applied on the material body of the book. These models quickly extend to the surrounding space and thus to the space of the viewer. And taking in account the special arrangement given by the pages, the book also can be compared with a film. Also, spatiotemporal models are primarily applied on the material body of the book body. These models quickly extend to the surrounding space and thus to the space of the viewer. Taking in account the diverse modalities of the interrelation of book and space, we can speak of an internal and an external space of the book. Also, it is not always possible to distinguish them accurately. Moreover, the transition is fluent, yet it is precisely the fluent transition that underscores the spatiotemporal concept of the book. The possibility linked to the book of not only semicizing space and time, but makes them sensible, is a well-known fact, at least since the 1960s. At the time, the term artist book was coined, and with it, an extended use of the book has been established. The various typical characteristics of the book became part of artistic expression, above all the possibilities given with the sequences of pages. This is meant that illustrations are deliberately spread out over several pages in order to complete their message only in the sequence. As a sequence refers to the principles of film, the phenomenon of time comes into consciousness. Seth Segelaub, for example, intentionally took into account the spatiotemporal qualities for his exhibition catalogue of 1969. The catalogue, which became known as Xerox book, has no precise title. Instead, the dates of the exhibition's duration replace the title, while on the cover of the book the name of artists Segelaub invited to exhibit are enlisted. The exhibition, however, took place exclusively in the book. The drawings sent by the artist form each a sequence of 60 pages, and the artist's concept became only clear by following the entire sequence of page. Segelaub was one of the first, but not the only one, who transferred the exhibition into the book, thus replacing the exhibition hall by the space of the book. Since then, the book has often been used as a space of exhibition. The spatial metaphor linked to the book, however, is not limited to the architectural space, but alike refers to an imagination, the sheer idea of space. Under this point of view, the book is considered as an equivalent of metaphysical concepts that operate with categories such as world or cosmos. The idea of including the whole world in a single book became relevant for the chronicles of the 15th and the 16th century, and alike for the encyclopedic work of the 17th century. These examples show that the conception of the book as a model of space and time is not as new as it might seem in the 1960s with the appearance of artist's book. As the concept of space is by no means linked to three-dimensionality as given with unfolding panels, pop-ups or other elements of page engineering. The idea of space as well as that of time can be recognized in less explicit expression in the book, such as illumination or the symbolism of material and depiction. With my presentation, I want to direct the attention to some examples of book conception which till then have not been subject of speculation on space and time. The examples I have chosen are taken from the medieval ages and the early Renaissance. They include the Codex Aureus from St. Emmeram, the Codex Gigas, which probably originated from the Benedictine monastery in the Bohemian town of Podlačice, a picture Bible from Paris known as Crusader Bible, and finally the drawing on the page margins in a Book of Hours from the end of the 14th century. Further examples of capturing time and space on the page of a book are illuminations in some prayer books, such as the Book of Hours of Mary of Burgundy, and another one from the collection of the Museo Calouste Gulbenkian in Lisbon. Also, the examples chosen for the presentation differ by their use and their background. They show a similar metaphysical understanding of space and time. They alike recognize the realia as presentation of idea. The Codex Aureus is bound in a gold-plated and gemstone-decorated cover. The material and decoration are not simply an expression of the preciousness of the book, but rather embody an image of the New Jerusalem. The symbolism of the entire goldsmith's work is revealed above all from a lateral view, as you can see in the small picture below. Each of the stones thus appear as a sacred building composed of columns and crowned by a dome. While some of the settings appear as a portico, others remind chalice. These chalices recall the Holy Communion by which mankind is united with Christ. Alike, the material has a spiritual meaning. In the description of the New Jerusalem, as given in the Revelation of John, the individual gems are listed and associated with a supernatural meaning. To the gemstones enlisted here have been attributed magical significance and healing powers. In this context, the decoration of the book cover is of high significance. In the center, we see an enthroned Christ. His feet rest on a globe. In his left hand, he holds an open book with pages showing the words Ego sum via et veritas et vita from the Gospel of John. The right hand of the enthroned Christ is raised to the gesture of blessing. The iconography of the Majestat Domini is completed by the background, which shows a mandorla. Divided in two parts, it refers to the double nature of the enthroned, being divine and human at the same time. Enclosed by a wreath of precious stones, the Majestat Domini forms the center of the city embodied in the book cover and in the book as a total. The decoration around the center is dominated by a cross decorated with precious stones and linking the inner frame with the outer one. The fields in between are decorated with gold hammered scenes depicting the four evangelists, which subjects from the gospel. On the upper left, the evangelist Matthew is represented, and further above, Christ with the adulteress. On the right, we see the evangelist John, and above him the scene with the expulsion of the merchant from the temple. Below are represented, on the left, the evangelist Mark, together with the healing of the leper, and on the right, the evangelist Luke, with the healing of a man born blind. The relief around the figure of Christ emphasizes his function as judge and redeemer. I am coming now to my second example, a picture Bible. Originally, the Codex, known as a Crusader Bible, comprised 48 sheets, 43 of which are in the Morgan Library, 2 in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and 1 in the Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles. All pages are decorated with full page illumination, which with some few exceptions, are divided in two fields, showing a picture above and one below. They are framed by a colored border. The frame, however, only functions as a formal boundary. In terms of content, it rather serves to mediate between the individual parts of the pictures as well as between the space in the picture and that of the page and finally that of the book. Already the color scheme of the frames, an alteration of blue and red, creates references that no longer isolate the single illumination but rather connect it to that of the following page. The restriction of color to some few tones form a consistent scheme with narrative qualities. The frames merge with architecture within the pictures, and the figures perceive them as part of the picture's reality. Thus, the frames no longer form demarcation, but rather mark a transition. They simply can be transgressed, in some cases even climbed up like a fence or a mural. From such details result a division in an outer and an inner zone, but both linked to one another by a unique action. The pictorial events are literally expanded by including the space outside of the picture field. The Crusader Bible was executed in Paris at the beginning of the 13th century and to all probability commissioned by Louis IX. Obviously, the commission was connected to the Crusades, which took place between 1244 and 1255. With the Crusades, a new conception of self-consciousness was introduced to the French people, that of being equal to the people of Judah. The idea was brought up through Pope Gregor IX in 1239. Louis was compared to Solomon, the Saint Chapel in Paris to Solomon's Temple, and the Grande Chasse of the Saint Chapel, containing the relics, became the Ark of the new convent. Paris was regarded as a New Jerusalem, and the picture Bible appears in this context as a parallel to the Saint Chapel. Stylistic and iconographic references to the stained glass windows in the Saint Chapels are evident. These references place the book in an architectural context. The Saint Chapel was consecrated in 1448, thus a few years after the completion of the Bible. It was built to house the relics of Christ's crown of thorns brought to France by the Crusades. In the illumination, the kings are depicted with the armors of the Crusaders. Lily and scepter as emblems underline the connection to the French king. The size and rich decoration of the book also suggests King Ludwig as a patron of the book. Apart from its specific spatial references, the Bible also includes those of time. Originally, there were no captions, though narrative clarity was achieved by cleverly designed architectural settings, costumes, and gestures. And Louis, at the main addressee of the book, was brought up in the knowledge of the biblical story. However, inscriptions followed, and the diverse scriptures reveal a temporal dimension of the book. The traces of time represented through the inscription extend from Louis IX to the third decade of the 18th century. The diverse inscription provided information about the various ownership of the Bible and extend from the death of Louis IX. The diverse inscription provide information about the various ownership of the Bible. Louis IX commissioned a poorly illustrated Bible that did not require explanatory text. After the death of Louis IX, the Bible came to Italy, where in the 14th century the Latin inscriptions were inserted. In 1608, the Bible came to Isfahan as a diplomatic gift for Shah Abbas, who added Persian commentaries to the Latin ones. After the conquest of Isfahan by the Afghans in 1722, the book came into the possession of Persian-speaking Jews who added Jewish Persian inscription. In addition to the writings, the inscribed text contained further references to ownership, such as a folio that at folio 1, that of Bernard Maciejkowski, Cardinal of the Holy Roman Church and Bishop of Krakow, Duke of Siewicz and Senator of Kingdom of Poland. A seal of the Persian Shah on folio 42 with the inscription Shah in Shah Abbas, which means Abbas, King of King, confirms that the book was in his possession. A further example of spatial and temporal consciousness in a book is a juxtaposition of two full-page illumination in the Codex Gigas, a manuscript from the Benedictine monastery Podlajice in Bohemia, which has become known as a Devil's Bible. Apart from ornamental initials and some few drawings on the margins of the pages, which obviously were added later, the Bible contains no decoration. The more striking are two illuminations standing next to each other, each filling a complete page. Folio 289 verso shows the heavenly Jerusalem, folio 290 recto Satanus. With heaven on the one hand and devil on the other, the two extremes of a theological program are captured. According to Christian belief, earthly life finds its completion with heaven and hell. They stand for eternal life and eternal damnation. The two depictions differ by their formal organization, one showing a dense row of small-scale architecture, the other a single figure. But both representations are surrounded by a golden yellow frame which connects the different representation under a sort of common architecture. The representation of heaven, obviously a reminiscent of the Apocalypse, is conceived as a city. The illumination shows it divided into 10 superimposed rows which are connected by blue and green columns. Each stripe is composed of several zones, the lowest of which is a city wall with battlements, above which houses and towers appear. Only the uppermost row shows only columns crowned with battlements. Since all the columns are arranged in front of the city wall, it is outside the city, they appear as supporting elements of the overall architecture of the city. However, here we are not so much referring to the architectural function as to the metaphorical function. They symbolize the pillars of the world, and not just any world, but the eternal world, as symbolized in the heavenly Jerusalem. According to the description of the text of the Apocalypse, the heavenly Jerusalem will appear as an integral architecture. The heavenly Jerusalem serves as an image that brings together the creatures of the first 6 days of creation in the Christ's head. The new Jerusalem is not earthly like the Holy Land, but heavenly. The opposite page shows the devil as a mixture of human and animal being. The representation seems to be based on a description of Leviathan in the book of Job. The powerful limbs, the double armor, the burning torches coming out of the mouth, the striking eyes are features that correspond to the depiction in the Codex. The combination of the two opposing illumination in the Codex as a whole is illuminated above all by the contents of the Codex. Contrary to the custom of the time, the book contains as well the Old as the New Testament, and between the two biblical books are integrated non-biblical writings, namely Josephus' treatise on Jewish antiquities and Jewish war, Isidore Sevilla's Etymologia, a chronic of Prague, and some medical writings, and finally Constantinus Africanus' writings. The compilation is highly unusual for a medieval manuscript. Even though manuscripts of different themes and from diverse sources were often grouped together, it is not usual to place the biblical books with non-canonical texts in a sequence. The fact that such combination nevertheless determines the contents of the Codex Gigas refers to a universal idea. The book should include all the knowledge relevant for the clerical life. Under this point of view, the Codex Gigas equals a space of knowledge. This association is underlined by the writings in the Codex. For example, Josephus describes the temple and everything connected with it as an analog of the world. I am coming to my last example with a prayer book written in Bruges and illuminated in Catalonia at the end of the 14th century. On the margin of the page it shows the founder kneeling before the Mother of God. However, by placing the prayer at the bottom of the book and the Mother of God with a child at the lateral margin, the page is considered as a space, which should remind the space of the prayer. It is the chapel of the prayer room. Also, two different pictorial realities are confronted to each other. On the one hand, that of the prayer in the here and now, and on the other hand, a meta-reality reserved for the Mother of God. Highlighted by a cloth of honor, she is taken out from the reality of the book page. Thus, she equals a representation of non-earthly reality, that of faith, and for the prayer she becomes a projection of eternal salvation. The ideas connected to the Mother of God are outside the book. The idea of non-earthly is further supported by the two birds and the cloth of honor. Thus, she equals a representation of non-earthly reality, that of faith, and for the prayer she becomes a projection of eternal salvation. The idea of non-earthly is further supported by the two birds holding the cloth of honor with their beaks. The cloth, intended as a spatial reference, remains in suspension, and with it the figure before it. The person praying is aware of the spatial and hierarchical distance. His head is turned slightly upwards, but his gaze is directed inwards. And for the viewer outside the book, the question remains unanswered whether Our Lady reveals herself to the praying person as a real devotional image or as a vision. Finally, the full-page illumination in the Book of Hours from the Calouste Gulbenkian Museum convey a different concept of space. Owner of the book is portrayed in several illuminations which form a sequence of some folios. All three illuminations show the same composition. Clearly distinguished from the foreground with the reader is a picture which, like a window, breaks through the ornament of the page and reveals a scene in the background. While the scene with the reader in the foreground remains almost unchanged, only the puppy on her lap changes its position, various scenes alternate in the rear section of the picture. One after the other, the self-hostage of St. Jerome, the Trinity, and an Annunciation are depicted. The changing scenes in the background are related to the text in the prayer book. In this way, they refer directly to the text, which obviously also the reader in the picture has in front of her. The reality of the picture asserts the presence of the reader, to whom is shown via the depicted scenes what actually she is reading in the text. In other terms, the reader of the Book of Hours can identify totally with the reader depicted in the illumination. The changing scenes indicate the progress of the reading process. The time that has passed while reading is therefore not only measured by turning the pages, but is immediately brought to mind through the prayers of the hours, which is linked to a particular scene. Thank you for your attention.
The last presenter of our session is Egidia Chiricaite from University College London. She will discuss book space as a metaphor of time. Egidia Chiricaite is a graduate student at the Slade School of Fine Art at University College London and UCL Linguistics, and a book artist. She creates and is interested in artists' books, how image and text, form and structure are communicated in them, and how meaning and emotions can be presented in a book. Her work has been acquired by many world-famous museums and private individuals. The floor is yours.
I will be speaking today about book space as a metaphor of time. Generally speaking, my research interests lie at the intersection of cognitive pragmatics and artist books, and more generally, artist publishing and book history. I'm interested in the problem of interpretation of language in the context of visual information and material qualities. Although based at the UCL, University College London, I engage with external institutions such as the British Library or University of Kent, and this talk is based on one such interaction, and specifically on the project Artists, Books and Medical Humanities. I had been in close contact with those books over a couple of years. I had been instrumental in setting up the collection, project collection at Templeman Library at University of Kent. And as many of you will know, when you spend a lot of time with a collection, especially if it is a curated collection on a specific subject, you start noticing patterns. So today I will be speaking about such patterns. I'll be speaking about metaphor, I'll be speaking about time, and I will be speaking about book structures. How do artists express temporal duration using visual elements of the book? And how does this choice of visual and structural elements reflect on artist narrative? So first of all, about the books. Now, I joined the project in 2015. In 2016, at Beanie House of Art and Knowledge in Canterbury, we opened an exhibition of artists' books of on well-being and medicine, prescriptions. The exhibition was organized by Dr. Stella Bolaki and myself as part of the project, led by Universities of Kent School of English and the University of New England's main Women Writers collection. We showed 102 artist books on a range of subjects related to, as I mentioned before, illness, well-being, and medicine. I will quickly flick through some of the works to give you a sense of the range of the books that the exhibition included. So although materials and structures and content of the selected pieces varied, most of the works were artist books made for handling. Only a few works were purely sculptural, like this one by Sophie Adams. Almost half of the books arrived in a traditional codex or pamphlet binding, or their derivative forms. Some books were very small and compact and rested neatly in hands, like this one by Penny Alexander, while others were tactile and unruly in their dyslexic scripts. Just over a third of books were a version of concertina, varying from seemingly boundless folded stream of minuscule words to deceptively tender and soft knitted folds of wire with breast tumors embroidered between the layers. There were also experimental bindings to be spread around. There were scrolls of delicate and fine Japanese paper to be rolled out into a river of meditation. There were photo books, of course. There were unique books, like this Arabesque by Randy Strand, a Norwegian artist. There were serious books of heartwarming honesty, The Unfinished Blanket by Erin K. Schmidt, and some really light-hearted, laugh-out-loud books, like Mr. Darcy's Advice to the Hip Patient. This book was later published as a mainstream book and won a number of awards. It's very funny. Some books reflected on private experience, while others were born from a public project and served as a vessel for many voices. Now I will talk then about the structures, and I will not be radical here, and I will start my talk with the obvious. I will start my talk with the famous Ulysses Carrion's manifesto. A book is a sequence of spaces, and each of these spaces is perceived at a different moment. A book is also a sequence of moments. In the opening lines of the New Art of Making books, Ulysses Carrion considers books as a sequential spatio-temporal experience. Indeed, books old and new are good at documenting time. They have done so for centuries in the form of diaries, sequential narratives, novels, biographies, coronation books, chronicles, accounts, planetary charts, you name it. Codex as an object beautifully illustrates linear perception of time and its sequentiality and segmentation into smaller units. What about concertina as a format of a timeline, a scroll? Linearity is not an aspect of printed media, but a reflection of the processing of human perception into meaning. Jana Drucker says in a definite statement on why linear narrative prevails, even in the face of almost limitless possibilities of electronic media. Now, my theoretical basis for this research is grounded in a very similar premise, but one that comes from linguistics. That is conceptual metaphor theory, which suggests that human thought is inherently metaphorical and that such metaphoricity manifests itself through speech as well as other forms of human expression. Metaphors are essential in expressing the abstract. Think about how we talk about emotions. Metaphors are important in sciences. Think about Big Bang. And we use metaphors creatively to make sense of the world. In 1980, George Lakoff and Mark Johnson published Metaphors We Live By, where they developed a theory that our understanding of the world is defined by a coherent network of conceptual metaphors, with verbal metaphors only being surface manifestations of what lays beneath. Metaphor, they say, is primarily a matter of thought and only derivatively a matter of language. We speak in metaphors because we think in metaphors. We use metaphors unawares. Their presence is ubiquitous, yet often invisible. They're consistent and they're systematic, the theory says. Now, consider how we speak about time in English. I'm sure studies have been done about conceptualization of time in Lithuanian too, and it would be interesting to see those, if anyone can recommend a source. Now, we draw timelines and note landmark events in history. There is a clear directional arrow on that line pointing towards the future. Generally, we look forward to the years to come and we look back on the years past. Occasionally, we get stranded in life, like we are getting nowhere. When things get particularly difficult, we take one step at a time, or one day at a time. We slow down not just the speed of walking, but the overall speed of life. Such domesticated surrealism, metaphorical language, is only possible because we think of time in terms of space. All the phrases here are grounded in the same metaphor. Time is space. Now, temporal aspects of the artist's book too are inevitably linked to its spatial structural sequentiality, where each space and page, each segment of unpaginated work, stands for a self-conscious moment in time of the narrative as well as a moment of the real clock time. When creating a book, artist controls those two parallel time flows so that the speed of reading is spaced right, so that the book unfolds at the correct rhythm, so that visual and textual elements flow in the right direction and the right order. Just as the space within a book can be understood as both literal and conceptual, so time and its related concept, timing, can be manipulated through physical as well as representational means. Due to the nature of collection, Prescriptions contains many works of documentary and biographical nature, which record temporal experiences of physical and or mental changes occurring over a period of time, like illness, healing, meditation. The space of the book is used as compacted and finite space of such illness time, healing time, or meditation time. The books based on temporal events are dominated by concertina or accordion structure in our collection. One of them is Diary of an Illness, Anne Perfett. It is a 36-foot long record of passing time felt during chronic illness. The artist says in her statement that it was a period dominated by waiting for diagnosis and treatment, transforming time through its deceleration, making her acutely sensitive to each minute, hour, and day. The book consists of repeated sequential drawings over the course of the whole year of a black bottle. Each image is an imitation of the previous, yet never identical, mirroring the indistinguishable yet unique nature of each passing moment. The artist, the observer here, remaining stationary, watching fragments of time pass one by one as an imitation of the previous, yet never identical. Those endlessly passing moments of time are mirrored in seemingly endless folds and a repetitive stream of bottles running along the top edge of concertina. It's a very cinematic effect. The whole book contains 1 year of treatment, and each bottle represents one day. When fully opened, it is a timeline of the chronic illness. Each day is distinguishable only by subtle changes in color, light, and size of each bottle. A version of Unfolding Time exists in Pauline Lamont Fisher's Dependency. Now, the previous Diary of Illness literally spills out of hand. It's an unruly book. The mind cannot contain the number of the bottles, the number of the days that it entails. Dependency here is compact, intimate, and very much finite. It is framed by birth and death. It's a span of life. It uses the same concertina format to mark progress of Alzheimer's disease. The book begins with a photo of a father playing with his baby son and ends with a photo of the son taking his elderly father for a walk. The two images are connected with 13 lines of thread, straight parallel paths which gradually change and descend into chaos, of tangled up lines crossing over and disappearing off the page. The lines are embroidered. So it's a view of the whole life from distance, in effect. It represents life as one defined segment. Once unfolded, it's contained within one glance. It's a journey, and the space of the book is the space of the time taken for this metaphorical journey. As the time and the book space flows, changes of life are marked by changes of direction and entanglement of the paths of life set within that space. Now, the next book is equally short, Halux Valgus by Beanie Aitkenson, which tracks a transformation using an articulated sequence of images now. Like the first one, Diary of an Illness, this book is fragmented into step-by-step succession of moments, from one picture to the next, from one state to the next, from one concertina fold to the next. Beanie Aitkinson's book is the healing record of etchings through a period of 6 weeks. There are 10 drawings, and they start with a painful picture of a bruised foot, stitched after surgery, and the last etching shows smooth healed skin with only a scar visible. We can't see that drawing here. Like the line of bottles, it's a diary. It's a private notebook made public. Compact, intimate diary with clear start and clear finish. Each drawing is a milepost, not a place of special significance, but a now moment, an evidence in progress, an evidence of healing, an evidence of time passing. So now physical and emotional healing is documented also in this cancer diary by Wishika Watson Singh. Unlike the two previous books, it is not a concertina, but a substantial folder of heavy, quite large folded sheets, painted, collaged, stitched, and overwritten with words. Singh produced the work live while she was recovering from mastectomy. So the time of making of the book coincides with the time of the narrative. The first page is a bright red embroidered, stitched up wound you see in the middle image. The book continues through 13 more pages of painting and collage, each inscribed with a word documenting her emotional and physical state at that instant. Each page is a milepost in the transformation that takes her from the trauma of the surgery to acceptance and recovery. Now, this cancer diary cannot be unfolded as the timeline. The reader takes one page at a time and puts it away into the pile of pages past, and only then picks up the next one from the folder. The reader, like the author, moves through the book slowly, step by step, rather than in a swift cinematic continuum of events, which concertina format allows. Picking up pages one at a time slows down the speed of the book and raises awareness of the content. Each page is considered individually. Each page is the now moment for the reader, as it was for Synge at the time of making. The book is a sequence of now moments embodied into the space of the page. I will now go quickly through a couple more works which I won't discuss in detail. So here's a few more books that deal with the documentation of time. So Prescriptions by Liz Brewer documents the amount of pills taken over a period of 5 years during her cancer treatment. Losing Touch by Karen Apps considers the erasing of the bond between mother and child during adoption. The Unfinished Blanket by Erin K. Schmidt is a very poetic and profoundly disturbing book as a recollection of a very private experience of miscarriage. Unknown by Carol Kluwer is a performance and a book, and the book is based on performance. She reflects on the number of people diagnosed with cancer in 2004, the same as herself, and marks each person with a silver ball pen. Speaking in Tongues, Speaking Digitally Speaking by David Patton, South African artist, is a reflection on communication between grandparent and child. Like Weather by Amanda Watson-Will, an Australian artist, thinks about tracks, the changes in emotion and mood through weather patterns. Now, time is an important aspect of the artist's book, clearly, as is books, visual language, and engagement qualities and structure. Temporal element is inseparable from interactive book form. Hands opening and eyes shifting across the surface create a sense of invented motion through time. Duration of such time is subjective, and it is not necessarily in direct proportion to the length of the book space. Time can be made to move slowly if obstacles are placed in the way, like Cancer Diary, where you need to move heavy pages, or it can be presented as one fleeting segment, as Independency by Paulina Montfisher. Time is embedded into the book structure and is activated through the relationship between the reader and the book. The books I have mentioned here represent the flow of time through a sequence of steps, changes, and pages. Unless the bookwork is a static sculptural object, book is inherently sequential in some way, and it remains for the artist to decide how to take advantage of such quality. Here, many artists chose concertina structure or accordion, probably due to its similarity to the timeline. Others chose a folio of loose pages then. Although codex is a perfect illustration of linear segmentation in perception of time, as I had mentioned at the beginning, it was markedly unpopular form of the book to record temporal experiences among our prescriptions artists. Movement, change, healing, a daily passage of time fused with the surface and structure of the book. Such blends of time and space resemble the tradition of narratives, such as novels or biographies, diaries and records, which all use the form of the book to lay sequence of happenings into a line from left to right, or a different direction depending on the language. Where artists' books excel, however, is that they do not take codex for granted. They reimagine and reconsider the needs of the narrative, so to remake and reconfigure the form of the book space as the space of time. Thank you. Ačiū.
Hello, everyone. Finally, live. Thank you for all your presentations. It was really, it was really exciting to listen, as I'm not a specialist in book art, but in photography. And of course, I treat books only through that aspect. For me, it was really revealing to listen to all your presentations about very different practices and periods and Especially Viola's presentation surprised me. I thought it would be about the 20th century, and we got into Middle Ages, so it was very exciting. And also we have a new experience. At least for me, it's the first conference which happens this way. I feel like, you know, my mind is torn between various screens, and I have to start multitasking. So I hope we will manage it. And we already have questions coming, and probably I will start reading them, although there will be some problems because people don't really sometimes say to which presenter they address, but we will try to guess. So let's start the discussion. We have a good half an hour, even a bit more, so we can be quite relaxed about it. So let's start. Yes, the question which is on the top by somebody who hasn't signed says that it's a very interesting presentation, and I think it's directed to Carolina. And that somebody, oh dear, asks about the context. I just have to somehow it got switched off, so I will have to find it. But as I remember the question, it asks about the context in which okay, Antanas Kazakauskas worked. Okay, were there other artists like him? Was he very exceptional, and so on? And I'll try to find this program which suddenly disappeared. So please, Carolina.
So,
Yes?
so it's mine?
Yes. I think it's your question. Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks a lot for the questions and for everybody who joined the conference. So actually, me too, I have to say that from one side, because all the speech was recorded and I have chosen to record it into the studio. So because of that special situation, actually I forgot to name his the most visible style he could be compared to. This is of course evident for the professionals. It's Swiss international typographic style, which is evident in his all typography, in his all books he designed. So this constructive manner and collage details were really unique to Kazakauskas, but of course we could find similar 60s design in other authors too. The other thing which again a bit was forgotten during my presentation, and which I wanted to say, because this is the section devoted to the borderlines of the printed book, this is that actually cinema and film-like feeling while looking at his books. So this is again some comparisons with the speeches we heard in this section. So actually the next work which is awaits my research comparing and writing about Kazakauskas style was again a bit stopped by the virus, because I couldn't go to the libraries and compare all the 60s and 70s books designed by other artists. So actually that would be the next step. But I can say, but of course, that he was in his own stenography, as we have looked in the photos. So he was surrounded by the international context. He was subscribing to the Polish books, to the magazines, and he was looking a lot to the films, to the cinema, to the magazines, journals, etc., etc. Another question which was about Kazakauskas in the discussion line was if Kazakauskas had any criteria of choosing authors or books for designing, and if he had the possibility to choose which was his decision. So I can say very briefly, but of course he wanted to avoid any very Soviet and very pro-Soviet authors. So even he, of course, had, of course, within the frames of that reality, if he has chosen any very red author, so he avoided this Soviet, for example, word even. And the same with this catalog. We don't see any Soviet name written in, so he avoided all those Soviet. He was very anti-Soviet. So again, the question was about the author. So he has chosen his favorite, like Vytautas Bložė, Sigitas Geda. Also, Augustinas Gricius was his favorite author, and of course, many international, of course, socialist international authors, detective stories, and very good humor. He had this sense of humor. So this is my answer, to be short. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have another question to Charlotte. Oh, but she is not here, unfortunately. No. So let's move to yet another one. To Sabine. Yeah. Gabriele asks, this is an interesting point that I have often thought about, the sound of leafing as an aspect of bookmaking. Thank you for your presentation. So could you elaborate on that a bit?
Yes, this is one question about the sound, and depends on the topic, of course. And John Cage is one of my favorite artists, and he works a lot with sound. And so I try to integrate the sound in the books. But another question was where the text comes from, I remember. And for all my books, at first is the text. I read a lot in science, poems, I read a lot. And when I start it, I must be very engaged with the topic and the text. And also for the students, we start every semester with a topic. Now we have the topic body. And we work together one semester on one topic and meet every week and speak about the topic and going on week for week and making dummies. Yeah. And another question which I remember was which material I like it most. It's transparency paper, because you can see what is under the page. You can make in many levels. And one question was if sometime was something wrong. And I have a book which is wrong. I don't know if you can see it. It's a book about genetic code, a text about how to read genetic code. And I printed on this side with silver ink and black text. And during the years, I made this book 10 years ago, the text and the pages on transparency paper, you can see, they made a connection. So the text is now on this side and sometimes not on this side. And I don't know why. This made a reaction, the color and the transparency paper, and I don't know what's happened, but now it's destroyed. It can be if you make artist books. Yes. The work for conserver, maybe.
You should keep it. It's a very interesting example.
Yeah. So thank you for the questions, and thanks for all your organization in Vilnius.
Indeed.
Yes, thank you, Sabine. Actually, when listening to your presentation, I thought what a privilege would be to study in your class. It was really exciting. Yeah. Yes, and I have here another question, not a question, but somebody says, thank you very much, Viola, for your very interesting presentation and new material. So I'll add my question to it. As I said, I was really surprised to to hear your presentation about medieval books, because from the abstract I understood it would be about 20th century. But as I'm interested in the questions of time and as it relates to art, I wonder if you could elaborate on, whether you were exploring this question, how these books, how their treatment of time related to the concepts of time during the period, philosophy of time and how time was measured. Did you ever consider that?
Yes, of course I did. Because I think that as a notion of time at the medieval ages was totally different from our notion. And people were much more connected to belief, to religious belief, as they depended on a life after the life in our present world. And I think that influenced the notion of time and also the notion of day. As we all know, they lived according to the sun rising, and they organized the day by a calendar, an interior calendar. They were not looking on the watches, or they hadn't even watches. That also influenced their relation to time, and I think all this became obvious with the books and the reflection on book, because also even the illuminations are not directly linked to the text, as we can see in the Gigas Bible, in the Bible of the Devil, but they are connected by a common notion of time. So we have the idea of the texts to connect all the important knowledge of the time, and by the picture, the only two big full-size illumination I have shown. There are other illumination, but they are more or less reduced to the text, by initials, for example, illuminated initials, and some small drawings, very small drawings on the margins of the pages. And only these two illuminations are full-size, and they are very different but they are connected by the idea of summarize the human existence by heaven and hell. I think these are two important points for the belief and the notion of time at that time, to refer to heaven and to believe and to hope to get in heaven, to get eternal life. And the contrary to eternal life is a hell, where we do not know how life will go on, but it's a sort of eternal life too, which will happen in hell. I thought that might be interesting to reflect more about the notion of time, just connected to these two illuminations, while in the other illuminations, for example, the books of hours I have shown, they are more obvious, these reflections on time. But especially with the Bible Gigas, it's a little bit not so easy to make it out.
Yes, thank you. They were very interesting examples. And now I would like to direct a question to Egidia. She also has some. Yes, this is here. Katarzyna is asking, apropos the Cancer Diary, are you familiar with B.S. Johnson's The Unfortunates, a novel in a box based on a similar concept of time? And maybe I'll also say another question which is similar. Could you mention any examples of books using codex format that disrupts or play with linear time? It's by Arate. But probably I cannot show two questions at once. Sorry.
Hi. That's really interesting questions. So the books that disrupt the flow of time and the narrative in the box. Now, I am aware. Is it Johnson's the novel? Yes, it is in the novel in the box. There is a history of artist books or novels that are produced as on separate pieces of paper that can afterwards be shuffled and rearranged, which makes me think, because I have got with me a bit of a cheat's clue. I brought the book, our prescriptions book here, the actual catalog, which may help me in this case. And we had, for example, we had one book which looks like this. It's a set of cards, not dissimilar to the Cancer Diary, and not dissimilar, well, it's not dissimilar to those novels. And this book is by Gemma Lacey, and it's called Home. And again, it plays on rearranging the sequence. The cards are double-sided. One side has an image, the other side has a word, some text, and there's almost endless possibilities of how you can rearrange and on how you can build meaning from that. In terms of codex disrupting the time, there's nothing from this specific collection that can spring to my mind, but really thinking about it, you would need to obstruct the flow of pages if you're using codex format, or link almost like hypertext to sections before or back to mess with that flow of time. But what does come to my mind is, again, I did reference that book before, and I'll mention it again. It's called The Unfinished Blanket. Goodness, I don't know how much of it is visible here, by Erin Schmidt. And it's not a codex, and it's not even paper. There's no paper in it. It's a knitted unfinished blanket. And it's a meditation on miscarriage. But what it has, as you can see, it's got a ribbon, and where it opens. On the ribbon, there is text. There's poetry printed. So when you undo the ribbon, you open one section of that concertina, knitted concertina. You read the poem, you think about it, and that allows you into the next section, where again you have the ribbon with a poem printed on it. You undo that section, you open it again, and it allows you further into the book until you reach the end, and right in the middle there is a printed another little poem on the actual in a more codex form. And I think it's a beautiful example of how an artist can take responsibility for the time and the timing of the book, the reader's experience, how instead of allowing reader into the book to flip through the pages and like go into the middle, any section that they want, because really, as an artist, I have very little control over how an individual will approach my work. Here, the artist takes full control over it and puts obstacles in the way that only allow the reader to come to the work in a certain way with very little choice. I hope that answers the question to some extent.
Yes, it was very interesting, especially I like the theme of obstacles to control the reader. And now, yes, I think, yeah, this would be appropriate to ask now again, Carolina. Somebody is asking, do you know if Kazakauskas have had any criteria for choosing authors or books for designing? And if he had the possibility to choose, and I would add from myself, knowing the situation with censorship, what you showed seemed like creations of really free spirit. So did censorship do anything to prevent him from how did he dealt with it?
So actually I a bit answered this question, but yes. I will try to contribute and to follow your thought. So actually, as I said, this self-isolation period now we are living in actually gave me the possibility to find the right keywords. So he himself he has chosen his main job to actually to be a designer in that very marginal magazine, as I said, called Our Nature, Mūsu Gamta, which was far away from all censorship. As you can imagine, he was dealing with animals, with the nature, with the plants. So actually the books he designed, it's just about 60 books in general. So his main job was not dealing with the main editorial houses, as I said. So of course he was more or less free to choose. As far as I had the interviews before the quarantine started, so his colleagues from his own time, he said that of course he was very brave in that time of censorship. Mm-hmm. He sometimes allowed it himself to be very, of course he had that very good humor sense, so he tried to do it in a very subtle way, but he was still quite very brave in that context.
Okay, thank you. And here is a word from Katarzyna. Hello, Seb. Oh, sorry. I'll send it. Send it up. Hello, Sabine. Good to see you at this conference. How do you choose texts for your artists' books? Sabine.
Yes, the text is also always the beginning of working. And sometimes I have to ask for the rights for the text, and if the text is not edited, like a text about weather, I made cooperation with the writer, and then I think about the form and the material and which way I can print. We have so many kinds of printing, and it's not necessary to use typesetting for an artist book. I know some collectors, they only buy if the book is made with letterpress, but I think a book with a text by John Cage, it's not necessary to use letterpress. He was avant-garde, and it must be work really good together. Yes.
Yes, thank you. And there are lots of thanks without questions, and some of them have been already answered, but I think this one could apply to all of you, and any of you could try to answer. It's from Birute. It seems to me that books are increasingly becoming works of art. What do you think? Mm-hmm. So we do not lose the information, the purpose of the original book. Probably there might be a conflict between the artist's work and the author's work. So what do you all think?
May I allow to answer?
Sure,
well,
sure.
I agree totally with Birute. I realized that especially artist book became an academic subject. Only some years ago at the university, artist book were not at all a subject of teaching, neither of art history nor of literature history, nor anywhere, even in the book studies, they did not pay attention to artist book. And that had changed during the last years. And I realized that there are a lot of programs, research programs on artist book. So I think it's coming up really to be a very important subject of arts, and not only arts, but also literature or reception at all.
Yeah, I also want to add in terms of not losing information. There is, I think, artist's book, you can consider it a little bit in terms of poetry. Like poetry, you can't really paraphrase exactly what information poetry contains. It evokes so much more than simply information. There are emotions in it. There are images that it evokes. And in the same way that there is a difference between a poetry book and for example, biology almanac, in the same way there is a difference between an artist's book, which evokes different effects, and purely functional encyclopedia. They do overlap, of course, but there's there's a lot that is contained in the artist book that is not paraphrased in simple terms of propositional sentence, which can be done in terms of encyclopedia. So yes, there is probably a shift there.
Thank you.
It's a transformation, I think, an artist book. A transformation of an idea, and sometimes at the end it can be unreadable. If the content says this, or if the artist, for the artist, the book is difficult to understand, or something is hidden, it can be visible at the end in an invisible book, invisible pages, invisible text.
Thank you. And Carolina?
Yeah, me too. I agree, but I think for the artist is like a compliment that it's, I mean, everybody wants that it should be seen something. Of course, it don't have to overload the content. You have to be in harmony with all that, but that's the way it goes.
Yes, thank you. And let's see this question from Joanna Sikorska to Viola. Thank you for an interesting presentation. Don't you think that some of these spatial activities are also a kind of games with the recipients?
Oh, it's really difficult to answer. It concerns again the thinking, the way of thinking from medieval ages. So how did people receive books? And we have to consider that only a very few quantity of all people living had access to books. I think most part of normal people do even not know or had not a clear notion about books and their context. So perhaps between people or monks or educated people, it might be also a play with knowledge, or to address their knowledge about time and space. So if they were educated in philosophy, if they were familiar with the ideas of philosophy at that time, I think they would have recognized this play with the idea of no time and space too. But it's difficult. I think it needs a big amount of researches on philosophy from the medieval ages and from the beginning of the Renaissance. And we have to reflect also that at the Renaissance time, at the turning from the medieval ages to the what we can call the modern time, there's a sort of paradigmatic change. So the change of the idea about the Earth at all and how the planets were connected and all that. So from the...
Yes, thank you. Actually, I've looked through the questions, and it seems that everybody is just thanking for your presentations, which is really what I would like to say. Yes, here I found maybe something that sounds more like a question to Egidia. Thank you for bringing in cognitive pragmatics or poetics to the discussion. Maybe could you elaborate on that?
Well, it gives a different perspective, so to say. My background, basically, I had 2 rounds of education. My first round of education was in Lithuania, and it was at Vilnius Magnus University, where I did English and then English linguistics as an MA. And my second round of education was already in London, where I went to Chelsea College of Art and later did MA in Book Arts at Camberwell, and now ended up at the UCL at the Slade. So I have dual kind of background, and it's something that it's one of those things that once you know, you can't unknow, you can't unlearn what you have already learned. So my perspective has always been influenced by what I knew from linguistics. At the moment, I'm working at the slate. My PhD is sort of located between the slate and UCL linguistics. Specifically, I'm working on a relevance theoretic approach to image and language issue. It's the way I see it is it is a different way of looking. It's like if you're playing with the sand, you're a child, and suddenly you're given a completely different set of tools to play with that sand. And although you can't build the same castles as you did with your previous bucket, you can start noticing different things. My work at the moment engages not just producing my own. It's not just my own practice. I'm also working with UCL special collections with a small press collection, which includes a lot of very interesting books, mainly from 60s and 70s by artists who published in Britain. But that perspective, I think, bringing in cognitive pragmatics, it puts the reader and the artist, it puts the interpretation at the center. It puts those processes, the actual effects that the work has at the center of focus. And that's what I find most interesting. How do those artists' books evoke those emotions and images the way that they do? How does this, not just the sequencing, but how the placement hierarchies of the page work on the reader? So this is what I'm working on at the moment. Not sure how much that answers. Thank you.
Thank you. I found, yes, I found here one note from Katarzyna, which could also become a question. I think it relates to Viola's presentation. Disrupting the linearity of the codex, Julio Cortázar's Hopscotch, Georges Perez Life Instruction Manual, and several more. I think maybe you could somehow, I don't know, discuss how these medieval books, their treatment of time relates to 20th century books, which really played with time in the text as well. And actually, this is a question I could also send direct to other presenters as well, because, for example, contemporary fiction is really focusing a lot on changing our perception of time, parallel times, time travel, and so on. And there were lots of presentations dealing with time, how it is presented in the book. And I'm interested in these questions. So maybe starting with Viola, but maybe also somebody else could discuss that, how artists' books react to this or also contribute to this.
You mean, well, the reflection of time within the texts. I refer to philosophy and theological, to believe, and the notion of time included in the text. If we read the Bible, there is also another notion of time included in the text. If we look at the ages of persons, if persons are named and their ages are given, they are often old for about more 100 years old. So, and to our notion, it's absolutely impossible that a person, especially from ancient times, became older than 100 years. So I think it's sort of metaphor, a metaphor of time, and that people were more thinking in metaphors, and we can refine these metaphors of time in the texts. Also, if people are speaking about, well, especially religious or theological reflections, metaphysical reflections, the notion of time is given in the texts, in their experience with a given world, but they transfer it to, they were always reflecting the time after the life in the real world. And I think this is included in most of the texts, this reflection behind what is described in the foreground. We have always this background of more metaphysical idea connected to the content or to the story given in the book. I have at the moment no clear example besides the Bible. What else? Sorry.
It's okay. Talking about time, I just noticed that we have only 1 minute left. So suddenly it was lots of time for this discussion, and suddenly it will have to end if we want to fit into the translation, into broadcasting of this discussion. So I don't know, maybe you would like to say a couple of words each to our audience, and this would be it. Just 1 minute in total. Carolina?
I'm saying thanks a lot, and yes, the time travel was the right what for my author. Actually, he traveled through the international cities like Paris. Even it was not possible to be there. So a bit situation similar nowadays. We are speaking to each other, of course, through the internet. For this possibility we have nowadays. Glad we have this.
Sabine?
Yes, I think about the last question. To turn the pages is the most important thing to show how time is working. Time is gone. It's a sequence, and this is the most important thing. The codex and scientists in Germany say the codex was more important than Gutenberg's Erfindung. And I think, yeah, we should think about this.
Yes, and Egidia.
Yeah.
I was just going to refer to the book that I spoke about. The very long concertina with the bottles imprinted, and where she says about the illness and the process of waiting and deceleration of time, how it slows down. And I was thinking about this situation we have found ourselves in now, how it has actually changed the concept of time and how we all feel time, because I mean, we're all in slightly different countries here and slightly different even time zones. We're across a couple of time zones here. And we all probably had slightly different but similar experience, and that makes you more aware of the days passing, because we are devoid of the usual markers, and how people have been speaking about losing the sense of what day of the week it is, what day of the month it is. And that's a really interesting concept. And I, just in terms of structuring time, how that structure is getting lost in those days. And I'm thinking about the structure of the book, which is inevitably structured in a certain way, and how artists have that choice of affecting the flow and affecting the structure of how it works.
Yes, thank you. I think it's a really appropriate way to finish our discussion, and we are out of time already. So thanks a lot. It was really a pleasure to meet you like this. I hope we will meet in real life and visit, let's say, Karolina's exhibition of Kazakevičius and maybe other things. So please come to Vilnius when it is possible. And now, good luck with your special experience of time in quarantine and with your creations and research. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.